Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report as we look ahead to 2017. And after the most unconventional presidential campaign in modern history, the country and the world await the arrival of President Donald Trump. So from his policy priorities to his communication strategy, just what should we expect after the billionaire businessman takes the oath of office on January 20? Let's ask Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, editorial board members Joe Rago and Mary Kissel, and assistant editorial page editor James Freeman. So, Dan, let's go to you first. What have we learned about Donald Trump in this transition period from Election Day to right now about how he's going to govern as president?
Well, I think we've learned a couple of things, Paul. Let's talk first about the transition, the appointment of the cabinet secretaries. I mean, this was a process that they had to pull together pretty quickly, and it's by and large been very well executed. Obviously, Trump has been delegating some of the choices, some of the vetting to other people, making the final decisions. That process has gone pretty smoothly. Simultaneously, he has indeed continued to send out tweets using Twitter to comment on events, and some fairly big events, like the UN resolution that was passed about Israel this past week. He has gotten in the middle of that. He has gotten in the middle of our relations with Russia.
What does that tell us, though, Dan? What does that tell us about how he's going to govern? Is it reassuring to you, for example, or does it tell you anything about his style? I mean, I want to not take communications first. What about the way he's picked the cabinet? I mean, you said it's been pretty orderly, but yet when you talk to people who he's interviewed, what they tell you is he's really focused on certain, almost an interpersonal relationship. Either make it work with them or not. And if it doesn't mesh, you're out of there, and real fast.
Yeah. Well, that's his negotiating style, and I think that's kind of he feels that he can establish a relationship with people and they can do business with them. If that is the case, I would expect Donald Trump to be on the phone all day long talking with congressional leaders of both parties, trying to see what they want, where they can strike an agreement. So I think he's going to be a very deeply involved president, much more than any we've seen previously, and he's going to use that Twitter account as a signaling mechanism. There's not going to be any White House sources say, it's going to be Donald Trump says.
Oh, I disagree with you on that. I think there's going to be a lot of White House sources say, because there's going to be a lot of disagreement in this White House. In fact, he set up a White House with what I would describe as competing power centers. You're going to have Chief of Staff Reince Priebus as one. You're going to have Steve Bannon, the Breitbart guy, as another. You're going to have Jared Kushner, the son-in-law, another. You're going to have Mike Pence, the vice president, another. Gary Cohn, the NEC director, National Economic, another. It's going to be, it could be, at worst, a kind of Tower of Babel, real fighting. Could be at its best, a nice, fertile mix that leads to good decisions.
Yeah, when you think Donald Trump, you don't think message discipline. That's not the first thing. But I got to say, to stand up for his cabinet choices here, maybe this is all gut instinct, but if it is, he's got tremendous instincts. You look at Andy Puzder at Labor, Betsy DeVos at Education, Ben Carson, a reformer coming in at HUD, Tom Price at HHS. A lot of picks here that
you feel as good about Peter Navarro that as the office, new office of trade.
Not all of them. Not all of them. Look, the trade is the big risk here, but what he's, I think, surprised in a good way a lot of conservatives who resisted his candidacy for so long because his history was not as a conservative. I think the cabinet picks have been strong.
Mary?
Well, I agree with James, and I think the media also often misses the fact that real Donald Trump and his Twitter account cannot run every part of government. He's appointing people who have a great amount of experience, especially with Puzder, as James points out, and who can do a lot of good on their own. There's a lot of regulatory mess out there that people like Andy Puzder, I think, are going to tackle very well. But I'm also watching the Twitter account because I see no reason that he's going to stop.
Well, it's kind of an improvisational quality to his leadership, Joe, and I think, and it leads to unpredictability. You never know quite what's going to happen, and I think Trump likes that. He likes keeping people on edge, even people who are in his own White House staff or in the cabinet. I wouldn't be a bit surprised, for example, to see him use Twitter to discipline somebody in the cabinet he thinks is off the reservation.
No, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think we should expect an administration that's as ad hoc and improvisatory as his campaign. But really the key point is this cabinet is not going to be kicking all in one direction like the Rockettes, but Trump likes to be on top of a structure like that where he's the decider. So I think he's going to be getting a lot of different views. It's going to be, and it's going to come down to his personal decision.
I want to play a clip from Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary incoming. He gave with a local news outlet.
He has this direct pipeline to the American people where he can talk back and forth, almost 17 million people on Twitter. He can put his thoughts out and hear what they're thinking in a way that no one's ever been able to do before. But you're right. I mean, he does communicate in a much bigger way than ever has been before, and I think that's going to be just a really exciting part of the job.
Hey Dan, exciting part of the job, Twitter, or a dangerous part of the job? I mean, if you think he's going to tweet as president, first of all?
Oh, I think absolutely he's going to tweet as president. I think he's going to send signals through Twitter. But the question is whether he's going to be able to move the process. I mean, the campaign is not the same as Washington politics. Excuse me. Washington politics is very complicated. There are a lot of competing power bases. There are the congressional leadership. There's the congressional chairman, subcommittee chairman. There are private interests. There are lobbies in Washington. There are the bureaucracies, which has significant senior managers inside them. This is all very hard to push. I think he'll try to use that Twitter account to lean on them, but he's going to have to negotiate directly and do much more politicking than he's ever done in his life to make any progress with those power bases in Washington.
Yeah, we got to give him some credit for the Twitter. A lot of us in the media spent several election cycles talking about all the candidates who didn't get social media, didn't know how to use technology. Here's someone who figured out how to use it and to spend a lot less than other people winning a presidential campaign. So I think he does understand president's a different job now. The tone is going to change a little. He's not going to swing at every pitch, respond to every former Miss Universe contestant in the White House. But
I'm not sure that's right, actually. I think he will.
I'm saying he's not going to swing at all of them, but it is a tool, and he knows how to use it.
Yeah. It's called Real Donald Trump for a reason. He's authentic. It's a counterweight to the mainstream media narrative.
All right, thank you. When we come back, the outgoing administration takes a parting shot at Israel and slaps some last-ditch sanctions on Russia. So what do these final acts say about President Obama's foreign policy legacy and the world he leaves behind? We'll ask General Jack Keane.
No American administration has done more for Israel's security than Barack Obama's. We reject the criticism that this vote abandons Israel. On the contrary, it is not this resolution that is isolating Israel. It is the permanent policy of settlement construction that risks making peace impossible.
Secretary of State John Kerry Wednesday defending the administration's controversial decision last week to abstain from a UN Security Council vote condemning Israeli settlements. Kerry's remarks considered a parting shot at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose relationship with President Obama has deteriorated over the last 8 years, as the two have clashed over differences on settlement building and the Iran nuclear deal. Retired four-star General Jack Keane is the chair of the Institute for the Study of War and a Fox News military analyst. General, good to see you again. Thanks for coming.
Glad to be here, Paul.
Okay, so let's talk first about the Russian sanctions this week that President Obama put on Russia for the hacking. Do you have any doubt that Russian intelligence was behind those hacks on the Democratic National Committee?
Oh, absolutely none. And no doubt whatsoever that Russian intelligence was involved, and no doubt whatsoever that Vladimir Putin authorized those attacks, much as he has done, Paul, in many of the elections in Eastern Europe, and the sources from MI5 in England indicate that he was involved in the Brexit vote. So this is a pattern of behavior, and it's all done to undermine democracies and weaken the transatlantic alliance that the United States has with Europe.
All right, so the Obama administration now put on sanctions. Are they enough, you think, to both punish those actions and serve as a deterrent going forward?
No, absolutely not. And let's just think of this. I mean, Putin annexed Crimea, and the United States and the EU imposed some sanctions on him. And after those sanctions were imposed, he began to attack into eastern Ukraine. He's still doing that, occupying part of eastern Ukraine. He's made a military incursion into Syria at direct expense of U.S. national interest in the Middle East. Sanctions have relatively had no impact on Putin, and nor will these sanctions either.
Okay, what about the UN resolution, not vetoing that UN resolution? You combine that with the sanctions and that action on the UN. Can you recall a presidential transition where an outgoing administration was taking such an active policy role that in a way certainly complicates things for the next administration?
Well, it certainly does, and I think, you know, it's disappointing, I think, to watch this behavior of an American president. This is his smallness involved in this. I mean, American presidents should have a global view and stature and get beyond personality. This is about his personality differences with Netanyahu, and to indicate that, let that run into a major policy decision here where we're punishing the only democracy in the Middle East, our #1 ally in the Middle East, and within 30 days of departing his administration, this is the outcome. It's absolutely embarrassing to watch that kind of behavior by an American president.
All right, let's step back a little bit and look across the whole Obama foreign policy legacy. 8 years. Is the world order more stable than it was when he came in? Is the world safer than it was when he came in, or the opposite?
Oh, it's absolutely opposite. I would ask our audience to just think in their own minds, where is a place in the world that has been improved in the last 8 years? I cannot find a place.
How about Burma? How about Burma?
I don't give you Burma. Okay? The point of the matter is that the global security challenges, Paul, I mean, they're on a scale we haven't seen since the end of World War II and the rise of the Soviet Union. We got 3 revisionist powers, Russia, China, Iran, all seeking regional domination and all having some success. Russia and China completely disagree with the international order that was established after World War II, and they're trying to take it apart right before our eyes. We got North Korea, a rogue state to be sure, trying to build a ballistic nuclear capability and threatening its use. Radical Islam. It has grown into a global jihad, and you've got ISIS, who's in 35 countries, and Al-Qaeda, despite killing Osama bin Laden, is a thriving, revitalized organization.
Okay,
and the last thing is cyber espionage is exploding on the part of Russia, China, and the Iranians. They have a significant technical capability, and they're taking advantage of it. And it's impacting our intellectual property. We know they tried to impact our elections. And we have done nothing until just recently to try to push back on that. And we'll see if the covert actions are strong enough to push back on Russia.
That's a very scary scenario you laid out with an awful lot of threats. So what, if you look at President Obama's behavior, what is it that allowed these threats to emerge? What is it about his policies that, I mean, it's sort of what's the big flaw that, in your view, that allowed this to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think he has a totally different worldview of the United States' role as it pertains to global security. It's different than every Democratic and Republican president we've had since World War II. He doesn't believe that the United States should be the global leader in the world to help obtain security, stability, and also economic prosperity. He's willing to disengage from the world as a result of it in a way that no other American president that I have seen. And he, you know, Paul, he gets paralyzed by the fear of adverse consequences. So he sees the adverse consequence and he works that through in his mind and says that's unsatisfactory. But what he doesn't see is what is the result of doing nothing. When you do nothing, bad things happen, and that is what's been exploding in the Middle East.
Well, I think that you're right about that's his ideological framework. I really agree with that. But also I think he was reacting and overreacting in the opposite direction against what he perceived as the excesses of intervention of George W. Bush. So he looked at what happened in Iraq, for example. He looked at what happened in Hamas and pushing democracy. And he said, I'm going to do the opposite because if we withdraw from the Middle East, at least substantially, then fewer bad things will happen. You agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with it. And, you know, one of the banners I would put up in front of any American president and new administration is do not overreact to your predecessor's policies. I watched the Bush administration overreact to the Clinton administration, who believed that they did too much nation building, sustaining other countries, and that's why we never put the commitment to Afghanistan and into Iraq that should have been in there under their policy leadership. So, yes, I totally agree with that. And usually, as a result of it, you get an overreaction to the previous administration's policies, and that in itself is flawed.
All right, we're going to hold over General Keane here. So when we come back, from the growing ISIS threat to the potential for a Russian reset, General Keane will take us through the global challenges facing Donald Trump and the new administration in the months ahead. Some big challenges facing President Donald Trump and his foreign policy team when he takes office January 20th, including the crisis in Syria, the continuing threat from Islamic terrorism, and Russia and Iran's growing influence in the Middle East. Continuing now with retired four-star Army General Jack Keane. He's the chair of the Institute for the Study of War and a Fox News military analyst. So, General, it's often said that there's more continuity than change in American foreign policy when presidents change. You think that'll be the same with Trump after Obama?
No, I think we're going to see a fundamental change. I think President Trump, come January 20th, will revert to the more traditional role of a strong American leadership, using multilateral relationships in the world to help achieve stability and security. Certainly, he's not looking for conflict, but what he will do is he will demonstrate, I think fairly similar to what Ronald Reagan did, by rebuilding the military and also committing a sense of resolve that there are times when I'd be willing to use it. He will be, I think, be able to achieve once again the kind of credible deterrence that this country has enjoyed in the past and what has truly evaporated and eroded under the Obama administration.
All right, let's go through some of the hot spots and countries you mentioned, emerging threats that you mentioned in the previous block, and see where you think Trump and Obama might differ. Let's start with Islamic State in the Middle East, because a lot of people think that maybe there's going to be some similarity in the strategy that Trump pursues against Islamic State that Obama has pursued, bombing from afar, relatively minimal commitment of U.S. troops. Do you think it'll be different than that?
Yeah, I think it will be, because the problem we have is not so much with Iraq. Now, the attack has been stalled there. They're trying to reignite it again. And I think in time, the Iraqis, and assisted by the Americans, will succeed. So the issue really Syria. It has always been Syria, which is the ISIS safe haven. So what's needed there, we don't have an effective ground force. I believe President Trump will ask the military, give me some options to defeat ISIS in Syria. They will bring forth ground options that will include some U.S. forces, an Arab coalition, maybe some NATO participation, other kinds of ground options. And I believe that President Trump will select likely one of those options combined with air power to get rid of this force, which is around 20,000 now, lightly armed force. They have no air power. They have no artillery. It would not take all that long to do. We just have not been able to commit to put that force together. I think he will probably make that commitment.
Okay. Do you think General Mattis, the incoming Secretary of Defense, if he is confirmed, will support that kind of a strategy?
No, absolutely. I know Jim Mattis very well. I don't want to presume, all the policy decisions that he's going to be facing in recommending, but certainly I know for a fact that he's as frustrated as I have been watching this unfold over these number of years, and the killing that ISIS has been able to do worldwide, largely because that organization still has a headquarters, still has resources, and still has an ideology.
Okay, let's talk about Iran, because that's a place where Donald Trump really did disagree with Barack Obama on the nuclear deal. But he faces a fundamental question. Does he pull out of that deal when he gets in power, or not? And then how does he manage it? Do you think there'll be a difference on Iran?
I think the real issue with Iran has always been the strategic issue for the region. Iran wants to dominate and control the Middle East, and they use proxy fighters and proxy terrorist organizations to do that. They've enjoyed some measure of success in doing that. Lebanon, obviously Hamas in Gaza, Syria, Iraq, and now Yemen. That is what they're truly about. Having a nuclear weapon was all about the preservation of the regime. Their strategic goal has not changed. What the administration has got to do and put on the table is, with our allies in the region, who to a person believe that Iran is the strategic threat in the region, is push back on the Iranians' adventurism in the region, using our allies as part of an either unofficial alliance or actually a form of an Arab NATO. Once we start to put that on the table and then hold them accountable, which would mean sanctions and other issues that we can get involved in, I believe the Iranians will pull out of the deal themselves at some point.
All right. We got one more with Russia, which in many ways may be the most complicated. President Obama put on the sanctions. Vladimir Putin said in response, well, we're going to hold off retaliating until we see how the Trump administration responds. That puts President Trump in a box when he takes office, I think, to some extent, because if he pulls those sanctions off, it means that he'll be accused by some people of rewarding the people who helped him get elected. How do you see him navigating the Russian relationship? Because he clearly wants a better relationship with Russia than we've had.
Listen, he'll be able to get a better relationship with Vladimir Putin very easily. And the reason is that, while Putin clearly is driven by anti-American policy, his desire to be on the world stage, and his desire to be a world power, all of those things are motivating him and playing to his domestic audience. President Trump will easily have a better relationship than what Putin had with Obama. Listen, Putin fooled President Bush, and he intimidated President Obama. He's not going to do either one of those, I believe, with President Trump. So the personal relationship will be considerably better. Now, what President Trump cannot account for is that while that personal relationship may be better, we are at opposing national interests.
Yes,
and that is the problem we have.
Yeah,
Donald, and that is the issue.
Yeah, and Vladimir Putin has never been able to keep his word, never kept his word with these other presidents. So I think that's a potential danger for Donald Trump, too.
And he's got to understand that and recognize that Putin is not a friend. He's somebody to work with, and that those interests are not in the interests of the United States, and we must push back on Russia's national interests.
All right. Thank you, General Keane, for being here. Fascinating. Still ahead, an optimistic end to 2016 with stocks soaring and consumer confidence high. So is the Trump economic bump real, and will it continue in the new year? Closing out the year on a positive note, with a conference board announcing this week that its consumer confidence index rose in December to its highest level since 2001. The president-elect was quick to take credit for the good news, tweeting the U.S. consumer confidence index for December surged nearly 4 points, the highest level in more than 15 years. Thanks, Donald. We're back with Dan Henninger, Joe Rago, Mary Kissel, and James Freeman. So, James, we're reading some of our friends on the left saying Donald Trump is inheriting one of the greatest economies that any new president has ever inherited. Are you buying that?
Well, I would say it has great potential when you move from the Obama agenda to the Trump agenda. I think.
Well, what about the state of the economy now? How strong is it?
It's been bumping along, given great burdens placed on it by Washington. But what you've seen since the election is that rise in not just consumer confidence but business confidence. You see the small businesses in the NFIB survey now looking to grow again, looking to hire again, and we're finally, I think, going to start to see an end to what's been really an investment recession in terms of companies not willing to invest in expanding new plant and equipment, new products. And I think that's what the Trump agenda promises.
Just to put a number on the last year, third quarter over third quarter, 1.7% growth in GDP. It was faster in the third quarter alone, but for the previous year, not so great.
Yeah, I think the answer you were looking for, Paul, is that this was the worst recovery in the modern era. Also called
you hear that, James? James, that's what I was looking for.
The Obama
She's
years.
got it. She broke the code.
Look, we've got terrible wage growth, lousy wage growth. This president has never broken 3% annual growth, which is really a remarkable statistic when you think about it. And you have millions of Americans who aren't participating in the labor force. So yes, James, there is a lot of potential out there.
Not arguing with anything. I'm saying that the bump is of what's to come. That's why stocks have gone up.
All right, and Joe, it does look like the consumer confidence. I mean, you've seen the dollar very strong, suggesting stronger investment in the United States, confidence in the United States. You're seeing bond yields go up, which suggests a future growth. So all of that is suggesting maybe the animal spirits of the economy are coming back.
I was just going to say, this is the revival of animal spirits. It's people are looking forward to a different policy mix, and if you can get a tighter labor market and all this money that's parked in cash or overseas into productive investments in the United States, you could really see a much more of a turnaround than what we've seen over the last 7 years.
So with all this bullishness, Dan, give us the contrary argument, because I want to point out that while since the election, markets have been buoyant, the last 2 or 3 weeks, the stock market has actually kind of plateaued. And I'm wondering, could it be that there's some concern about some of the economic advisors that Trump is nominating, particularly some of his trade advisors, Peter Navarro, the economist in particular, in a new trade office inside the White House that hasn't been part of other presidents' economic team.
Well, let's pick up on that point about trade. I mean, the word for trade, putting up tariffs and so forth, is protectionism. And what does that mean? It means you are protecting existing companies. And if there's a problem in the U.S. economy right now, is that there's very little new business creation. That is the sector of the economy where new jobs are created. Instead, we have these incumbent firms, many of them very good ones, Google, Facebook, but you're seeing in the last few years a tremendous amount of consolidation in telecommunications or in health insurance. Companies are combining. They're not expanding. You have no new companies. For instance, the number of new companies coming into the economy as a share of all firms is below 10%, an historic low. Its contribution of employment is at about 2%, also an historic low. And what's needed, as Joe was suggesting, was the liberation of capital to pour into the economy so that new businesses can form. And whether that would be offset by a protectionist policy is a very good question. You run the risk of running in place if you go that direction.
James, you studied the IPO, initial public offering history, and it's really been slow. It's just been historically very bad these last years, particularly this last year.
Yeah, 2016, a terrible year for new companies coming to the public markets. We think of some of these tech sort of giants like Uber as signifying the strength of the tech economy, but the truth is, in terms of the overall number of businesses being created, we're really behind where we used to be. Labor Department put out a report early this year, not just tech companies, but all kinds of businesses open less than a year are creating far fewer jobs than they created 20 years ago when we had a smaller population, smaller economy. So I think that piece, getting small businesses created, getting people optimistic enough, the animal spirits to take the leap, that's what's been missing, and that's what you hope the trade agenda doesn't screw up. That's what the tax and regulatory reform agenda can unleash.
And he really has to produce 3-4% growth, does he not? Get up out of that 2% Obama trough to be able to pay off his voters in those industrial Midwest states who elected him.
Well, there's no way he's going to raise wages without faster growth, unless we can get beyond 1 to 2% to 3 or 4. The risk for Trump is that we're now 6 years into an expansion, one of the longest recoveries without a recession in U.S. history, and just not a lot of space to respond to some kind of big shock to the economy, either monetary or fiscal.
All right, thank you all. Fascinating. When we come back, Republican leaders in Congress look ahead to a new administration and map out an ambitious agenda. So will President Trump sign on to their plans, or does he have some of his own?
When we come back, January 3rd, we'll be moving to the Obamacare replacement resolution. The Obamacare repeal resolution will be the first item up in the new year.
The 115th Congress set to convene for the first time on Tuesday, and Republican leaders in the House and Senate are mapping out an ambitious agenda with tax reform, regulatory relief, and as you just heard, the repeal of Obamacare topping the list. So will President Donald Trump sign on to the Republican plans, or does he have some of his own ideas of how to proceed? Joe, so Paul Ryan's plan in the election the year before was, I'm going to map out an agenda, get all the Republicans in the House to sign on to it, and that means we're going to be able to take off on day one. Is that now what's going to happen?
I think we're going to find out, obviously.
But is that do you think at least they're going to try?
What Paul Ryan has done is he's built a remarkable consensus within the Republican conference around 6 areas of policy, whether it's tax reform, energy, health care. You know, the House has been awfully dysfunctional for the last 4 years with a lot of different factions. Now you've got a big majority for some of these ideas, and as far as we know, Donald Trump has said, I'm on board with this, certainly on taxes, certainly on health care.
Do you see any potential differences, Mary, potentially emerging between the Trump agenda and the House or Senate Republican agenda? Not just policy details, but priority lists.
Well, I think for Donald Trump, trade, as we talked about in the previous segment, is a big issue. He wants to punish companies that go abroad. That could bring him into conflict with the House. There's questions about the timing of Obamacare repeal and replace and the form that's going to look like.
But is he? I think those are both right. But will Trump want to do something more on immigration restriction, for example? Put up that wall as one of his first acts, as opposed to the Republicans in the Hill who want tax reform, Obamacare replacement?
Well, I think it depends on what the wall actually is. Trump has shown some flexibility on immigration. Just look at his comments on, for instance, the Dreamers, where he seemed to indicate that he was ready to strike a compromise there. So I actually think Trump might show more flexibility and willingness to compromise with Democrats than we might give him credit for.
And yet a lot of his supporters, Dan, Trump supporters, are going to want to see something happen on immigration. It looked to me pretty early, I think, and Trump and Steve Bannon in the White House and some of those populists are going to be inclined, Jeff Sessions, to try to push something maybe faster than Republicans on the Hill want.
You know, Paul, there's only so much a president really can do in the first 100 or 150 days, and there's a big agenda here. You're talking about immigration, let's not call it reform, but a wall, a tax bill, financial deregulation, repealing and replacing Obamacare. Look, Congress's job is to grind through the details of that policy. And a president's job is to provide leadership and leverage where necessary. And he can either make Congress a partner, or it can become the Bermuda Triangle for his presidency if he tries to push too much into it.
Yeah, I agree with Dan on that. I think the nightmare scenario here is that Trump gets it to war with the Republican Congress. So not only will he be attacked by Democrats, but he'll have differences with Republicans, and then he gets very little done.
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways, though. Mary talked about how Trump has shown flexibility on immigration. I think the Republicans in Congress also have to have some understanding that the things he made central to his candidacy, he has to deliver on in some fashion. Now, there are parts of our border that have fences. Can we build them a little higher? Sure. I think you probably have to give him something. He can say, look, we have a wall. That doesn't mean you go where he's going, or you think he might go on trade. It doesn't mean you restrict how many people can come into the U.S., but I think you probably got to give him a wall.
This issue of bandwidth that Dan raised is important. I mean, you only do so many things, and I only think they have really a year to get the most important priorities done, Joe. What would you put at the very top of the Republican Trump list?
Yeah, I mean, I think health care, tax reform, and then some.
And by health care, you mean not just repealing Obamacare, but also replacing it.
Right. And what you have to understand is that the fastest diminishing commodity in Washington is a president's political capital. It's going to be going down every day that he's in office. So I think if they don't show some big movement by this summer, they're really the inertia of Washington is going to take over, and they're not going to deliver on this remarkable reform opportunity that they've got.
And Mary, I would argue that what you're going to see is early victories with a confirmation of a Supreme Court nominee and a lot of regulatory repeal, and those will be early victories they can rack up.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's something that he can offer to Republicans in Congress, especially that Supreme Court nomination, absolutely immediately. But Paul, also, I think there's a big deal to be done on tax reform, not just with Republicans, but getting Democrats on board too. Think of the opportunity here for something like a business tax reform that you package as a jobs bill. You get some Democrats on board with some infrastructure spending. So Donald Trump could have some big victories early on if he wants them.
All right, thank you all. Much more to come as we look ahead to the new year. Up next, our panelists pick their person to watch in 2017. So who will be the newsmakers in the new year? We're back with our panelist picks for the person to watch in 2017. Dan, start us off.
Well, Donald Trump has promised to defeat Islamic State. So my person to watch is the new Secretary of Defense, former Marine General Jim Mattis. Jim Mattis was the former commander of the Marines in Anbar Province in 2004, and then he was the head of the Central Command, Central Command, which covers the Middle East, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. He knows the area code from the level of boots on the ground up to 30,000 feet, Paul. After 8 years of the Obama policy in the Middle East, the strategy is going to be complex and even perilous. So I say watch Jim Mattis for the way forward. 2
points in particular. He disagrees with the historic positions of Donald Trump on Russia. Jim Mattis much more skeptical of Vladimir Putin, and also on the budget. He's going to want to expand the military. And Mick Mulvaney, the budget director, Dan, he's a skeptic of military spending. Thinks there's a lot of waste.
I think Jim Mattis and Donald Trump are going to have many interesting conversations.
All right, Joe.
Paul, my person to watch is Chuck Schumer, the New York Democrat and incoming Senate Minority Leader. A lot of Democrats are calling themselves the resistance. They're going to oppose Donald Trump and all his works on everything. But Chuck Schumer is not by nature or temperament the resistance. He's a transactional deal maker, and I'm wondering if he's going to make some kind of compromise with the Trump administration.
I'm watching China's leader Xi Jinping, who I think is going to test Donald Trump early and vigorously, far more than just seizing some underwater drone. And I think he's going to test him for largely domestic reasons. He declared himself core leader. He's consolidated his power. That means he has to assert his power over the party elites. And he also has to demonstrate to the Chinese people who are suffering, not just from a sluggish economy, but from endemic graft and corruption and these sort of daily indignities, he's going to have to give them something else to think about. And I think that that's an area and a person we need to watch very closely.
Do you think it'll be a military test?
Yes, I don't see why not.
Okay. All right, James.
My guy is Harold Hamm of Continental Resources. This is one of the people behind America's fracking revolution that's given us so much oil and gas here in the United States. He's now got, finally, a non-hostile government coming in Washington. He's also got a world where the OPEC countries are saying they're going to cut production of oil. They normally cheat on these agreements, but let's say they take production down. So we might see U.S. energy firms really start to dominate the world market.
And what does that do to oil prices? Do you think that they're going down because of that production, or and what does that do to Saudi Arabia?
Well, this is the big question: is do Harold Hamm and the other frackers in the U.S. Look at this as a chance to grab market share, or is it an opportunity for them to boost their profits and kind of join the cartel unofficially that OPEC is in? So to me, that's the person to watch, and that's the big question, because the impact for U.S. consumers and the economy is huge.
All right, my person to watch is former Goldman Sachs executive Gary Cohn, who is taking on the role as National Economic Council Director in the White House. It's the most important economic job in the administration, maybe even in this case more important than Treasury Secretary, but we know very little about what he thinks. We don't know where he stands on taxes, for example. Is he a Keynesian, like spending for growth? Is he a protectionist? So how he exerts himself in this administration is going to be crucial going forward.
And it's kind of a question of how much harm can he do if he's not on board with tax reform, because you've got the president who wants it, the Congress wants it. If it doesn't happen, we'll know who to blame.
He'll be on board for tax reform. The question is what kind. How low does the rate go, for example? Where does he weigh in on that? Does he care about tax rates being low? We know Donald Trump is not ideological.
Right.
Okay, we have to take one more break. When we come back, our panel's predictions, fearless predictions for 2017. Time now for our panel's predictions for 2017. Dan, start us off.
Well, Paul, my prediction is that under the presidency of Donald Trump, the Republican Party is going to see a revision and even an upgrade of its relationship with the country's minorities, especially black Americans. You have Betsy DeVos taking over at the Education Department, a proponent of creating competition to failing public schools in the form of charters, perhaps scholarship programs for minority students. And then over at the Housing and Urban Development, you've got Ben Carson. And Ben Carson isn't just going to be about building houses. I think Ben Carson is going to be talking about the structure of urban and inner city life. So in both those areas, I think you're going to see them working in conjunction with Donald Trump, addressing black Americans directly and trying to create more opportunity for them.
Yeah, fascinating opportunity, Dan. I hope Trump leads on that because it really could be a big opening. Joe?
Paul, my prediction for 2017 is it's going to be the year artificial intelligence goes mainstream. Now, this refers to when a machine learns to do a task it wasn't programmed to do, like translate a language, drive a car, for example. And it really has a huge potential to increase worker productivity, raise wages, lead to advances in science and technology. But it's also going to cause a lot of dislocations. You know, millions of people drive trucks or taxis for a living. AI can write a basic legal document, can even report the news. So I'm wondering if this is happening faster than politics and society.
But the crucial question for you at this table is how fast do they become editorial writers? Can they learn free markets and free people, Joe?
We'll have a few more years after 2017.
Thank you. It sounds like if they take the lawyers down along with us, maybe that's a good trade,
okay,
right?
The rise of the machines.
There will always be need for editors, however. All right.
Yeah, I'm going to go way out on a limb here and predict that Marine Le Pen, the leader of France's far-right National Front, is going to win the French presidency, continuing the trend of populist political surprises that we saw starting with Brexit and then the five-star movement in the rise of that in Italy and others. You know, stranger things have happened. The Cubs won the World Series, so that's what I'm going to predict.
I'm going to disagree with you on that, Mary. I'm going to say that Francois Fillon is going to win. He's going to be he's a center-right candidate, but he's moved enough to the right on immigration and nationalism to co-opt Le Pen's support. But here's the key that's really hopeful for France for the first time in 5 or 6 decades.
That there is a Francois Fillon there.
Yes, is economic reform. He's pushing the most aggressive economic reform agenda that I've seen in France.
But
in
Paul,
decades.
if there's, God forbid, another major terror attack in France, then I think Fillon might not be seen as strong enough, and that's where I think Le Pen might try.
Okay, James.
I think a word is going to come back into our economic discussions in 2017, and that word is inflation. I don't think it's going to be a raging inflation, but I think this is going to be a factor again. As we see the economy reviving, I think it will. All of this money that's been created by the Federal Reserve the last 8 years or so, I think that starts to have an impact. Banks are going to feel, under Trump, I think maybe a little more free to lend, a little regulatory restraint there. So I think the next step probably to watch for some inflation.
That's interesting. My prediction is that President Trump will cut a deal with Vladimir Putin. He'll, in return for getting some Putin help against jihad and Islamic State, he will cut a deal in which he gives sanctions relief to Putin, kind of ignores what's been happening in Ukraine, and lets him have his way in Syria, and says, all right, as long as you don't touch NATO, we can work together. The problem with that is Putin never keeps his word, but I think Trump wants to do that deal.
I got to think that Trump has some understanding, especially with Tillerson on board, that this is a guy you got to watch very carefully.
Tillerson likes Putin.
Well, Tillerson has done business with Putin.
We don't know that.
So, sort of like in The Godfather. He did business with him, but he never liked him.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I might be wrong about whether he likes him. We don't know that, but he has done business with him. All right, it's going to be fascinating to watch. Thank you all. And remember, if you have your own prediction for 2017, be sure to tweet it to us at JER on FNC. That's it for this week's show. Thanks to my panel. Thanks to all of you for watching. I'm Paul Gigot. Happy New Year. We hope to see you right here next week.